The elk in the mist. The silence of Blackwood Creek wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a wool blanket soaked in ice water. Sheriff Jim Miller stood at the edge of the shadowed tree line, his boots sinking into the damp earth of early November. The radio on his shoulder chirped with static, but he ignored it. His attention was fixed on the abomination lying in the ferns. It was a bull elk, massive and ancient, but it hadn't died from a hunter's bullet or a wolf's jaw. It looked as though it had been turned inside out. The animal's majestic brown fur had sloughed off in wet, bloody patches, revealing skin that had hardened into something resembling grey, cracked porcelain. "Doc, tell me I'm seeing things," Jim muttered, the metallic taste of fear rising in his throat. He pulled his scarf tighter against the biting wind. Dr. Aris Thorne, the town's only physician and coroner, knelt beside the carcass. He didn't touch it with his bare hands. He used a long, sterile metal forceps to tap the creature's flank. Clink-clack. The sound was unmistakable, like a stone skipping across a frozen lake. It wasn't flesh. It was rock. "This isn't rigor mortis, Jim," Aris said, his voice trembling as he leaned closer. "Look at the eyes, or where they used to be." Jim forced himself to look. The elk's sockets were filled with jagged crystalline growths, sharp as broken glass. The antlers hadn't just grown. They had fused with the skull, creating a crown of calcified bone that encased the entire head. The creature's mouth was locked open in a silent, eternal scream, the jawbone fused to the maxilla by a web of white, stony veins. "The tissue has undergone rapid ossification," Aris whispered, horrified fascination warring with disgust. "It's not just the surface. The muscles, the fascia, maybe even the organs, they've turned to calcium. It became a statue while it was still breathing, to patient zero and the first rattle." 3 hours later, the uneasy quiet of the town was shattered at the Blackwood Diner. The diner was a warm refuge against the cold, smelling of stale coffee and frying bacon. Locals sat in booths, murmuring about the strange weather, unaware that death had just walked through the front door. Elias Thorne, the doctor's younger troubled brother, crashed into the entrance. He didn't walk, he lurched, his movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. He slammed into the counter, knocking over a display of pies. "Water!" Elias rasped, the words sounding like sandpaper dragging over concrete. His face was slick with sweat, but his skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. Marge, the head waitress, rushed over with a glass. "Elias, honey, you look terrible. Sit down." Elias grabbed the glass with a hand that shook violently. He threw his head back to drink, but as the water hit his throat, he gagged violently. He doubled over, clutching his neck, his fingers digging into his own flesh. A terrible, wet hacking sound filled the room. Hack! Crack! Elias coughed, and something flew out of his mouth, skittering across the linoleum floor. It wasn't bile. It was a solid, white lump, the size of a marble. Jim, who had just entered the diner for lunch, walked over and picked it up with a napkin. It was hard, warm, and covered in blood. It looked like a piece of coral. "My throat!" Elias wheezed, looking up. The diner went deathly silent. Elias's neck was pulsing. Visible beneath the skin, the blue veins were turning white. They branched out like lightning, hardening instantly. Elias screamed, a sound that started as a human cry and ended as a mechanical grinding noise. His jaw locked, his left eye bulged, and then turned milky white as the lens calcified instantly. He wasn't just sick, he was hardening from the inside out. Blind panic took over, and Elias lunged at Marge, his fingers now stiff, bone-hard claws ready to tear. The lockdown and the ancient spore. The chaos at the diner was only the spark. By sunset, the small clinic was overwhelmed. Jim Miller stood in the hallway, watching through the reinforced glass of the quarantine bay. Inside, Elias was strapped to a bed, but the restraints were straining. He was no longer human. His skin was fully grey, impenetrable as concrete, and he thrashed with the strength of a machine. Dr. Thorne walked out of the lab, ripping off his mask. He looked aged by 10 years in a single afternoon. "It's a spore, Jim," Aris said, holding up a slide. "I found it in his sputum. It's prehistoric. It must have thawed from the permafrost up on the ridge near the mines. When inhaled, it enters the bloodstream and acts like a hyper-accelerated bone cancer." "Is it contagious?" Jim asked, his hand resting on his revolver. "Extremely," Aris replied grimly. "It's airborne in close proximity, but it also spreads through fluids. Once it hits the brain, it attacks the frontal lobe. It strips away empathy, reason, and memory, leaving only the reptilian brain aggression and the drive to spread." Jim looked out the window. The sun was dipping below the mountains, casting long, bloody shadows across Blackwood Creek. "We have to close the road," Jim said, his voice steel. "Block the tunnels, cut the phone lines. If this gets to the city, millions will die." "It's already moving fast, Jim," Eris warned. "Incubation is less than 6 hours. The fever is the first sign. Then the coughing up of lung tissue, we call it the rattle. Then the solidification." As if to punctuate his words, the emergency siren atop the fire station began to wail. A mournful sound that signaled the end of the world was beginning in their backyard. The white fever rises. Nightfall brought hell to Earth. The infection, now dubbed the white fever by the terrified residents, moved through the town like a wildfire. It wasn't a quiet death. It was a cacophony of agony. From the rooftops, Sheriff Miller watched his town crumble. The streets were filled with the sounds of breaking glass and crunching bones. The infected didn't move like zombies. They didn't shuffle. They moved with terrifying, erratic bursts of speed, their stiffened joints popping loudly with every step. A man ran out of the hardware store, screaming for help. Behind him, his own wife pursued him. Half her face was gone, sloughed off to reveal the white bone mask underneath. She swung her arm, which had fused into a singular, jagged club of bone, and struck him. The sound of his skull cracking echoed up to the roof. The transformation process was horrific to witness. Those in the second stage. The rattle were on their hands and knees in the street, vomiting up pieces of their own internal organs as they turned to stone. Their screams were gurgled, cut short as their vocal cords ossified. "They are building a hive," Jim muttered to himself, watching a group of the calcified drag bodies into the town square. They weren't eating them, they were piling them up. The radio on his hip crackled. It was Father John from St. Jude's Church. "Sheriff, we have 30 people here. They are outside. They are scratching at the doors. It sounds like knives on wood. Please, God help us." The Siege of St. Jude's. St. Jude's Church was a fortress of stone and stained glass, now serving as a tomb for the living. Jim Miller kicked open the side door, ushering in the last few stragglers before barring it with a heavy iron candelabra. The air inside was thick, hot, and smelled of unwashed bodies, incense, and the copper tang of blood. Women were crying softly. Men stood with shotguns and axes, their eyes wide with terror. "They are surrounding us," Father John whispered, his hands trembling as he clutched a silver cross. "Jim, are we safe here?" "Nobody is safe, Father," Jim replied, racking the slide of his shotgun. "We need to check everyone. Now, if anyone has the fever, they turn in minutes. The inspection was a scene of cruelty and necessity." Jim moved down the aisle, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He checked eyes for dilation, throats for the white lines. In the back pew, Sarah, the town librarian, sat huddled in a blanket, rocking back and forth. She was holding her 7-year-old son, Timmy, so tight it looked painful. "Let me see the boy, Sarah," Jim commanded softly. "He's just sleeping," Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "He's just cold. Please, Jim, don't." Jim didn't wait. He ripped the blanket away. The horror in the room was palpable. Timmy wasn't sleeping. His lower jaw was missing, it had fallen off, replaced by a jagged growth of crystallized bone. His skin was grey and hard. Timmy opened his eyes. They were solid, white orbs. He didn't cry for his mother. He hissed, a sound like high-pressure steam escaping a vent, and sank his calcified teeth into Sarah's shoulder. Blood on the altar, the scream Sarah let out shattered the tension in the room. Blood sprayed across the wooden pews as the boy, the monster, ripped flesh from his mother's neck. "Timmy, no!" Sarah gurgled, collapsing as the infection entered her bloodstream instantly. Jim raised his shotgun. Boom! The impact didn't kill the boy instantly. The calcified skin acted like body armor. The buckshot shattered the outer layer of the boy's chest, sending razor-sharp shards of bone flying like shrapnel into the crowd. People screamed as they were cut by pieces of the infected child. "He's not stopping!" someone yelled. The boy, half his chest blown open to reveal solid white stone instead of lungs, lunged at Father John. Chaos erupted. The noise attracted the horde outside. The main oak doors of the church began to splinter under the assault of hundreds of stone-hard fists. Crack! 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 "The doors won't hold!" Jim roared over the din. Everyone to the crypts! Go! Now!" As the survivors scrambled toward the altar, the main doors exploded inward. A tide of grey death poured into the sanctuary. The calcified moved with hysterical violence. They tackled the fleeing townspeople, bludgeoning them with fused limbs, biting with stone jaws. Father John stood his ground, raising his cross. "Back! Go back to hell!" A massive miner, fully calcified, grabbed the priest by the head. With a sickening twist, the priest's neck snapped, and his body was tossed aside like a rag doll. Jim grabbed Dr. Thorne and a young woman named Elena, shoving them toward the trapdoor behind the altar. "Don't look back!" Jim screamed, firing blindly into the grey mass. "Just run!" The tunnels, the belly of the beast. The heavy iron trapdoor slammed shut above them, muffling the screams of the massacre inside the church. But the silence in the crypts was worse. It was the silence of a grave. Jim, Dr. Thorne, and Elena stood in the suffocating darkness of the old mining tunnels that ran beneath Blackwood Creek like rotten intestines. The air was damp, smelling of mold, wet earth, and something metallic, the scent of the virus itself. "We need to keep moving," Jim whispered, his voice echoing too loudly in the cramped space. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam was weak, cutting a yellow cone through the dust. The ventilation shaft leads to the radio tower on the peak. It's a 3-mile hike underground. They began to walk, but Dr. Aris Thorne was dragging his feet. His breathing was wet, sounding like a sponge being squeezed. "Jim!" Aris gasped, leaning against the rough-hewn rock wall. "Stop, please!" Jim turned the light on the doctor. The sight made Elena cover her mouth to stifle a scream. Aris wasn't just tired. The virus, accelerated by the adrenaline and the cold, was consuming him. His left arm was frozen in a bent position against his chest. The sleeve of his coat ripped open to reveal skin that looked like grey marble. "It feels heavy," Aris whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of scientific curiosity and sheer terror. "I can feel my bone marrow crystallizing. It's pushing against my nerves. The pain, God, the pain is gone. Now there is only the itching." "We can carry you," Elena said, stepping forward, though her hands trembled. "No!" Aris barked, his voice distorting into a grinding rasp. He looked up, and his right eye was now clouded with white cataracts. "The frontal lobe goes next. Empathy, love, restraint, it all calcifies. If I go with you, I will kill you before we reach the ladder." Aris reached into his pocket with his good hand and pulled out a scalpel he had saved from the clinic. "Go, barricade the door behind you. I will hold the tunnel." Jim looked at his old friend. He saw the monster rising beneath the skin, the humanity fading like a dying ember. "Goodbye, Aris." The hunt in the dark. Jim and Elena ran. They didn't look back, but they heard it. Behind them, in the darkness, Dr. Thorne screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain anymore. It was a roar of liberation. Then came the sounds of tearing fabric and snapping bones as his body twisted into its new lethal form. Thump, drag, thump, drag. The sound echoed off the tunnel walls. The doctor was coming. He wasn't walking. The rhythm suggested he was galloping on all fours, like a broken spider. "Faster!" Jim urged, grabbing Elena's arm. The flashlight flickered and died. Total darkness engulfed them. "I can't see!" Elena panicked. "Keep your hand on the wall," Jim commanded. From the blackness behind them, a voice echoed Udaaris's voice, but a mockery of it, sounding like stones grinding in a mixer. "Jim, I can see your heat. You burn so bright. Let me put out the fire." The virus had given the calcified thermal vision. To the thing that was once Aris, Jim and Elena were glowing beacons in the dark. Jim stopped. He could hear the creature breathing right behind them, a dry, rattling hiss. He pulled his revolver, aiming blindly into the dark. He didn't fire. He had only 2 bullets left. Instead, he swung the heavy flashlight with all his might. Crack! It connected with something hard as granite. Sparks flew from the impact, briefly illuminating a horrific face. Iris's jaw had split down the middle, opening sideways like a flower of bone and teeth. The creature shrieked, momentarily stunned. Jim found the rungs of the iron ladder leading to the surface. "Climb! Don't stop for anything!" They scrambled up the rusted shaft. Below, the scraping of bone claws on metal got closer. A hand cold, hard and sharp grabbed Jim's boot. It felt like a bear trap closing. Jim kicked down with his other foot, stomping on the creature's face. He felt the nose bridge shatter under his heel. The grip loosened, and Jim vaulted out onto the snow, slamming the heavy grate shut just as the creature slammed against it from below. The White Nightmare. They emerged into a white void. A blizzard was raging on the mountain peak, the wind howling like a banshee. The temperature was 20 degrees below zero. "We made it," Elena sobbed, collapsing into the snow. Jim looked down at the valley. Through the breaks in the snow, he could see Blackwood Creek. The town was burning. But amidst the flames, thousands of grey figures stood motionless in the streets, looking up toward the mountain. They sensed the survivors. They were a hive mind now. "The tower is just past that ridge," Jim yelled over the wind. "Come on." They trudged through knee-deep snow. The cold should have frozen the infected, but the white fever generated an intense internal heat. Suddenly, the ground shook. A pine tree to their left snapped in half with a sound like a gunshot. Out of the swirling snow, a monstrosity emerged. It was a black bear, or it had been. Now, it was a walking fortress. The virus had turned its fur into a carapace of spiked bone plates. It was easily 10 feet tall on its hind legs. Its eyes were gone, replaced by glowing red fissures of heat. It roared, and the sound wasn't animalistic. It was the sound of an earthquake. Spittle froze instantly in the air as it dripped from a mouth filled with rows of serrated, obsidian-like teeth. The sacrifice. It's guarding the tower, Jim realized. The beast blocked the only path to the radio station. "We can't fight that, Jim," Elena whispered, paralyzed by the sheer size of the creature. Jim looked at his revolver, then at Elena. He looked at his own leg. He had twisted it in the tunnel, and now he could barely stand. He was an old man, and this was the end of his watch. "Get to the door." "The control panel is inside," Jim said, his voice strangely calm. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to feed the bear." Jim stepped away from Elena, waving his arms. "Hey, over here, you ugly son of a bitch." The bone bear turned its massive head toward Jim. It dropped to all fours and charged. The ground trembled. Jim stood his ground. He waited until he could smell the rot on the beast's breath. Bam! He fired his last bullet directly into the creature's open mouth. The shot blew out the back of the bear's throat, but it didn't stop the momentum. The bear slammed into Jim, tossing him 20 feet into the air. Jim hit a rock, and the sound of his ribs shattering was sickening. He lay in the snow, blood bubbling from his lips. The bear, enraged and blinded by pain, loomed over him, raising a massive paw to crush him into paste. Whoosh! A streak of red light cut through the storm. A flare. Elena had found the emergency flare gun in the external survival box near the tower gate. The flare embedded itself into the soft tissue of the bear's exposed ear canal. The magnesium burned at 3,000 degrees. The bear thrashed, clawing at its own head, its brain boiling inside the bone skull. It stumbled backward and fell off the cliff edge, plummeting silently into the abyss below. The broadcast. Elena dragged Jim inside the radio tower. The wind instantly died down as the heavy steel door sealed shut. The room was filled with the hum of old electronics. Jim was fading fast. His chest was caved in. "The radio!" he wheezed. Elena scrambled to the console, flipping switches with frantic fingers. Static filled the room. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Blackwood Creek Radio Tower. Is anyone there?" Silence. Then a calm, distorted voice cut through. "Identify! This is Elena Vance. I am with Sheriff Miller. The town, everyone is dead or changed. We have a viral outbreak. We need immediate medevac." There was a long pause. The voice on the other end lost its robotic tone and sounded almost human, almost sad. "We know, Miss Vance. We have been monitoring the thermal signatures. The bio-threat level is catastrophic. Containment protocol is active." Jim grabbed Elena's wrist. He pulled the microphone down to his bloody lips. "Don't send choppers," he rasped. "You can't stop this with doctors. You have to burn it. If one of those things gets over the pass, it's the end of the world. Do you understand me? Burn it all." "Copy that, Sheriff. We have birds in the air. ETA 2 minutes. Payload is napalm. I am truly sorry." Jim let the microphone drop. "Good," he whispered. The statues, dust to dust. The silence returned to the room. The only sound was the low rumble of jet engines approaching from the distance. Jim tried to sit up, wincing. He looked at Elena. She was standing by the window, watching the snow fall. She wasn't shivering anymore. "Elena?" She turned around slowly. The right side of her face was smooth, grey and hard. The scratch she had gotten in the tunnels, a small, insignificant cut, had blossomed. Her right eye was already white stone. Her fingers were fused together. "It's funny, Jim," she said, her voice sounding hollow, like an echo in a cave. "I was so scared of dying, but now I don't feel fear. I don't feel cold. I just feel solid." She walked over to him, her footsteps heavy, clink, clink. "I don't want to burn, Jim," she whispered, a single tear freezing on her remaining human cheek. "But I don't want to hurt anyone either." Jim looked at his empty gun. He had no bullets left. "Come here," Jim said softly. He pulled her down next to him. She was heavy, like a statue. He wrapped his arm around her hardening shoulders. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his Zippo lighter and a crumpled pack of cigarettes. He lit two. He put one in his mouth and placed the other between Eleanor's fused lips. "Just close your eyes, kid," Jim said. Elena closed her human eye. Her calcified eye remained open, staring at nothing. "Is it going to hurt?" "Quick as a flash," Jim lied. He looked at the window. The reflection showed him the truth. A grey patch was spreading up his own neck from where the bear had touched him. He smiled. The ash from his cigarette didn't fall. It just turned to grey dust. The roar of the jets was deafening now. The sky outside turned a brilliant, blinding orange. "Dust to dust," Jim whispered. The first canister of napalm hit the tower. The explosion was absolute. There was no pain, only light. The fire swept down the mountain, consuming the forest, the town, the church, and the thousands of statues standing in the streets. Blackwood Creek was erased from the map, leaving nothing but scorched earth and silence. The end.